Have you ever witnessed a small moment that revealed a dark side to how people treat each other on a late-night flight from Seattle to Tokyo? A flight attendant made an offensive remark to a woman of color. Oh, a woman who sat silently, not reacting, not fighting back. It was just a look and a deep breath. But behind that silence was a secret. She was the CEO of the airline. But the paradox lies here. If it were you, when you were insulted among dozens of strangers' eyes, would you stand up to defend yourself or choose to stay silent and wait for another opportunity? Is calmness a strength, or is it the pain that you have to suppress because life has forced you to do so too many times? And most importantly, when the truth is revealed, what do you hope will happen? Punishment? Forgiveness? Or an ending strong enough to touch the hearts of those who have forgotten that respect is something everyone deserves? If that question makes you pause for a second, we invite you to join the story, a journey that touches on pain, choices, and the moments when people find light in each other. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any heart-touching stories. Late afternoons in Seattle always have a slightly sad, slightly hazy feel, as if the city wants to slow down a bit before darkness falls over Elliott Bay. The cool breeze from the water carries a faint scent of sea salt through every crack in the doors of Departure Hall at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Inside, soft yellow lights illuminate the polished stone floor where suitcases roll in step with the hurried footsteps of passengers preparing for their long-haul flights. In that moment, no one knew that in just a few minutes, a story would begin, a story that would later be discussed by millions of people on social networks. A story that seemed so ordinary but was enough to shake not only the fate of a flight attendant, but also awakened long-standing wounds deep in the heart of a strong and calm woman of color, a person the whole world thought she could not be hurt. A narrator could have begun this story in many ways, with a sigh, a question, or a warning. But perhaps the most appropriate is this. What happens when someone judges you by your appearance without knowing the real you? That question, so gentle, is enough to touch the heart of anyone who has ever been misunderstood, overlooked, or despised simply because they don't look like what society expects. And the story of Skylift Airways Flight SL-207 from Seattle to Tokyo that day is a profound reminder that respect is never based on appearance. Near Gate D14, groups of passengers were lining up. Some were chatting softly. Some were staring at their phones. The loudspeakers blared, announcing that boarding would begin in 10 minutes. Everything was peaceful and natural, like any other day. None of them recognized a woman of color, in her late 50s, with a gentle face but sharp eyes, walking slowly toward the large glass door overlooking the runway. It was Dr. Naomi Carter, CEO of Skylift Airways, an airline present throughout the United States, and also the owner of the very plane she was about to board. But she was not wearing a business suit. There was no escort. No one was calling her Madam Carter. She was wearing only a gray wool coat and a dark blue scarf. In her hand was a frayed black leather handbag, a gift from her mother 20 years ago. And because of that almost unrecognizable simplicity, a mistake began to form. Naomi stood there, silent, watching the line of planes parked on the nearly 3-mile-long runway. The sunset cast a breathtaking orange glow over the body of Skylift's Boeing 7879. Every time she saw this light, she remembered what her mother had said. "My child, the sky is so big that everyone deserves a place in it, but not everyone knows how to let others fly." Those words touched her heart especially today. For some reason, in the midst of this silence, Naomi felt a strange premonition, a slight pang in her left chest, a little uneasiness. a little indescribable. Maybe it was the busy week, or maybe she'd seen too many unfair things in her life, or she knew she was about to see one more. Naomi let out a small breath and adjusted her scarf. An announcement came on pre-boarding for flight SL-207 will begin in a few minutes. The passengers bustled about. Some left their seats. Some remained reading. Everything was normal, still peaceful. No one knew that behind the plane door. A small storm was waiting to start. A young flight attendant had just walked through the aisle leading to the plane. Her blonde hair was tied up high. Her face was pretty, but her eyes were a little sharp and cold. Her name was Jenna Hill, a Skylift flight attendant for more than 8 years. She had a good reputation among some of the more demanding wealthy customers, and she also had a somewhat unpleasant temperament, which some colleagues had whispered about. Jenna has always believed that she knows people by their appearance, the way they dress, or the expression on their faces. This false belief has gotten her into a lot of small trouble, and a big one that she is about to create. Jenna was a little nervous that day. She had been getting complaints about her attitude from guests all week. She knew her quarterly performance review was coming up, and instead of getting better, Jenna was trying to prove herself by taking control of the cabin in what she thought was a good way. But serious sometimes turns into picky, and nitpicking sometimes turns into disrespect. Jenna walked past gate D14, her eyes scanning the waiting area, when her eyes landed on Naomi, a modestly dressed woman of color. Jenna frowned slightly. Just a second. But that 1 second was enough to lay the foundation for the tragedy to come. Naomi felt the look, not harsh but enough to notice. She was used to such looks from her years as an engineer at NASA. Looks that asked, "Who are you?" instead of, "What are you like?" Her heart sank a little, but Naomi told herself to stay calm. All her life she had chosen patience over anger. Choose to stand her ground over immediately attacking. A line of passengers began to form. Naomi joined the crowd, keeping a gentle distance, waiting her turn. On the small screen beside the gate, the words "Boarding Group 1" lit up. Naomi belonged to that group, but she was in no hurry to get to the front. When Naomi gave her boarding pass to the staff to scan, the staff smiled. "Have a safe flight, ma'am." Naomi nodded her thanks and stepped into the jet bridge, the long tube leading into the belly of the plane. Those first steps were light but meaningful. Naomi never thought she would have to face such a situation, especially on a Skylift plane. But life sometimes likes to tease with unexpected challenges. And today, that challenge is unfolding little by little. Naomi stood at the plane door and took a deep breath. The distinctive smell of the cabin, a touch of wood, a touch of perfume, a touch of leather, felt strangely familiar to her. This was the second home she had helped build over the past 12 years. She had no idea that the very place she loved most was about to be the place where she was deeply offended. A small sound came from behind her. Naomi turned around. Jenna Hill was standing in the doorway, smiling industrially. "Welcome aboard." But her eyes were not smiling. Naomi nodded back, gently as she always did, and that little moment, was the beginning of all that was to come. The Boeing 787-9 business class cabin was as quiet as a luxury living room in the late afternoon. Warm yellow lights bathed the navy blue leather seats, accompanied by the familiar sounds of air conditioning and passengers unlocking their luggage. Everything seemed to lull people into a state of peace before the 4,500-mile flight westward across the Pacific Ocean. Naomi walked slowly to seat 3A, a window seat, her usual spot on long-haul flights. A little privacy, a little quiet. An angle that allowed her to see the runway as long as her life straightforward, persistent, and marked by many challenges. She put the old leather bag in the glove compartment. Her fingers gently stroked the frayed edge. She always carried that bag, no matter how many designer bags she had in her closet. It was a gift from her mother, Linda Carter, a black woman who worked 2 jobs so her daughter could go to college. Naomi remembered her mother's rough hands, the smell of cheap detergent on her clothes, and the times they were turned away from fancy stores because they were not suitable customers. Those memories, though distant, are still imprinted inside her like delicate but never-fading folds. Naomi sat down on the chair and took a deep breath to relax. She had slept late the night before because of a meeting with the new project team. Her eyes were still a little strained, and there was a strange heaviness in her stomach, the feeling she had always had when something was about to happen. The flight was smooth. A middle-aged American passenger was reading the Wall Street Journal. A Japanese woman was texting someone and giggling. An elderly couple was taking a selfie in front of their seats. All is normal, yet Naomi still felt a vague void in her heart. She quietly wondered, am I doing enough to change the company culture? Are the principles of respect I have built strong enough so that no one has to experience the looks I have endured? She reached up to adjust the seat monitor. An internal memo popped up, a new customer survey she had personally edited. She had spent years improving Skylift Airways' service culture, from the way flight attendants spoke to passengers, to how conflicts were handled, to details as small as greetings at the door. And each time she flew incognito, she wanted to see how far those changes had come. She didn't expect this flight to be a test. She just wanted a peaceful journey to prepare for an important meeting in Tokyo. But life sometimes teases those who don't want trouble. A voice called out from the front of the cabin, "Would you like anything before takeoff?" Naomi looked up. A young, friendly-looking flight attendant smiled at her. It wasn't Jenna. This one was Mark Rivera, one of the flight attendants who was highly regarded for his friendliness. Naomi smiled back. "Just water." "Thank you." "Of course, ma'am." Mark's gentle demeanor put Naomi at ease. But she also noticed that Jenna, who had been giving her a disapproving look earlier, had yet to appear in her seat. Naomi mentally reviewed the new flight attendant training schedule. Right. They were in the midst of a service culture shift, focused on respect first. She hoped Jenna had learned that, but a nagging feeling in her gut didn't quite agree. She reassured herself, maybe she's just tired. Every flight has a flight attendant who isn't very pleasant. We shouldn't judge too quickly. Naomi always tried to think positively like that, always tried to give others a chance. She had been in their shoes. She understood the fatigue of the service profession. She understood the invisible pressure on their shoulders. Yet, deep down, she still sensed something was wrong. A feeling that people who have been discriminated against for a long time are often acutely aware of, something they don't want to, but still recognize immediately. Naomi tried to focus on the notepad before her, but each line sent her mind drifting back in time. As an intern at NASA, Naomi once stood in front of a cockpit simulator with a group of white engineers. When she proposed a solution to improve the control structure, a colleague said flatly, "I'm not sure this is the kind of technical detail you'd understand." She remembers the burning sensation in her chest when she heard it. Another, younger person looked at her as if she were in the wrong place. A woman of color in a room full of mostly white male engineers, an image that was not acceptable at the time. But she stood her ground. And in the end, it was her solution that NASA adopted. That memory is like a scratch. It stings every now and then. Like today. Naomi breathed a sigh of relief, trying to let go of her emotions in the soft seat. But just as she was trying to find peace for the flight, a figure passed by her seat. carrying a familiar, cold aura. Jenna Hill. Naomi hadn't had time to lift her head. Jenna just glanced at her, her eyes flashing with confusion, a little wary, a little judgmental. Not the eyes of a professional service worker, more like the eyes of someone trying to classify the object before her. And that look, just for a moment, was enough to remind Naomi of all the times she had been judged solely by the color of her skin. Something is coming, little by little. Jenna continued down the aisle, but Naomi knew the first cold gust of the storm had touched her. A woman can be strong enough to lead a global company, but that doesn't make her heart immune to old wounds. She looked out the window. The plane taxied gently down the runway, the Seattle sun setting behind the mountains. The gold faded to pale purple. It was a beautiful, calming sight. If Naomi had known that in just a few hours, this entire flight and the life of a flight attendant named Jenna Hill would change completely. She might have taken a few minutes to breathe more deeply. But now, the flight began to take off, and the fates of the two women, one accustomed to being underestimated, one accustomed to judging others, silently intersected. The peace only lasted a few more minutes. Then everything will start to fall apart. The Boeing 787-9 rolled slowly down the runway, the engines vibrating softly in time, creating a steady sound like the sigh of a bird familiar with the sky. Naomi looked out the wide window. The last light of the day reflected her face, calm, gentle, and a little tired. She touched the glass lightly, as if to hold on to that peaceful moment longer. In business class, passengers were settling into their seats. The click of seatbelt buckles echoed throughout. Some were turning the pages of their books. Some were wearing headphones. The atmosphere in the cabin was like the moment before the curtain rose, quiet but slightly tense, as if the story was about to begin. Naomi leaned back in her seat. The thick, soft cushioning supported her body perfectly. This was the kind of seat she had helped design based on comfort standards for flights longer than 10 hours. She knew every stitch, every angle of the backrest, every adjustment. But today, as she sat down, Naomi felt a slight strain on her back. Maybe because of Jenna. That feeling still lingered in the air. Not because of what Jenna had said, but because of her eyes. Eyes that held the thought, "Do you belong here?" An unspoken question, but easily seen in her gaze. Naomi brushed the feeling aside and pulled the thin blanket over her legs. She needed to keep her mind clear for the important meeting in Tokyo. However, she still couldn't help but notice her surroundings. The business class cabin is designed in a warm, elegant style. Navy blue seats are accented with gold trim. Dimmed LED lighting is easy on the eyes. A gentle scent, a blend of orange and cedarwood essential oils, wafts through the air. She always wanted everything on Skylift planes to feel welcome home to guests, even if they were halfway around the world. A man sitting across the row, about 50 years old, wearing glasses and a white shirt, was trying to stuff his laptop into the bag under his seat. He was awkward. His hands were shaking slightly, and he seemed unfamiliar with flying. Naomi looked at the scene and smiled softly. She gently stood up, bent down, and helped him fasten the zipper. He looked at her, a little surprised. "Thank you so much, ma'am." "I'm terrible with these things," Naomi replied in a soft, warm voice. "It's nothing. Don't worry. This flight is long. We can relax." He smiled and nodded in thanks. It was a small action, but it made Naomi feel lighter. Inside the cabin, Flight attendant Mark Rivera was doing a final check. He walked from row to row, bowing slightly to each passenger. His wavy brown hair was a little messy from running around, but his eyes were always bright, professional, and friendly. Anyone who looked at Mark knew he truly loved his job. Mark looked at Naomi and nodded in greeting. Naomi smiled back. Mark didn't recognize her, and Naomi liked that. As long as customers weren't treated differently because of who she was happy. But unlike Mark, Jenna was hardly seen in the area. Naomi noticed, but said nothing. The peaceful atmosphere lasted for a few minutes. Then the announcement rang out. "This is your captain speaking. We'll be taking off shortly." The deep, clear, warm male voice belonged to Captain Richard Owens, the captain of Flight SL-207. With over 25 years of experience, he was known for his discipline, his principles, and his dedication to passenger safety. Naomi had met Captain Owens twice before in internal meetings, but he had never met her as a passenger. She liked him, a traditional American man, quiet, hard-working, and trustworthy. As the plane began to accelerate, Naomi closed her eyes. Her body shook with the powerful thrust. The engine roared softly, then grew louder, and finally, the most familiar feeling, the moment the plane lifted off the ground. Naomi felt every small change in the force. She understood the principle, and she could sense the emotions of the people below. Leaving the ground was always a big dot, a transition, a step to a new chapter. The cabin settled. The subtle lighting changed from yellow to pale blue night mode. Passengers loosened their belts. One opened a laptop. Another took a pen to a notebook. Naomi poured a small amount of water into her palm and gently rubbed it on her temples. Her head felt a little tense. Perhaps it was from the week's work. A moment later, Mark returned with a tray of water, "Ma'am." "Would you like anything else?" Naomi said softly. "No need yet." "Thank you." Mark smiled and continued walking. But when he reached row 4, he stopped, frowning slightly when he saw that no one was in the dining area, where there was usually a flight attendant. "Where's Jenna?" Mark muttered. Naomi heard. She didn't react, just watched silently. The business class cabin was quiet so far, but Jenna's absence was strange. A veteran like her would have made at least a few appearances before the main meal service. A moment later, as Naomi was reviewing some notes in a document, she heard a soft pull. The curtain in the galley area opened slightly. Jenna stepped out, adjusting her hair, looking impatient. Her eyes scanned the cabin. When they finally landed on Naomi, the slight frown on Jenna's face returned for the second time tonight. Naomi swallowed, not out of fear, but because she could feel the dislike growing. The refined atmosphere of business class seemed to have a small scratch, very small, but it was enough for Naomi to feel that her peace was being threatened. She took a deep breath. She told herself to stay calm. Let's see what happens. We shouldn't jump to conclusions. Her personality has always been like this. Take a step back. Observe. Then choose how to react. But she couldn't have known that. In just a few minutes, this very calmness would cause Jenna to push things further. Much further. So far that it cost Jenna dearly, and brought Naomi face to face with a pain she thought she had buried for a long time. The last silence has just passed. The thunderstorm began to form. As the plane reached a stable altitude and the seatbelt sign turned off, the space in the business class cabin became comfortably quiet. The lighting changed to a soothing blue, and small lights above each seat lit up like individual stars in the miniature sky of the cabin. Passengers began to relax some, put on headphones to listen to music. Some turned on their computers to work, and some stretched their legs to enjoy the spaciousness of the luxury cabin. Naomi put the document down on the table, gently turned her neck to relieve the fatigue. She intended to close her eyes for a few minutes, but at that moment, from the front of the cabin, footsteps sounded, not too loud, but sharp enough. Each step, Each step, regular, decisive. The kind of footsteps of someone used to controlling space, used to showing power, or used to judging others. Naomi opened her eyes, and then she saw Jenna Hill. Jenna's expression was no longer indifferent, not scowl, but not friendly either. Her blue eyes held a look Naomi was all too familiar with: a scrutiny, a classification, a judgment based on what the eye saw, not what the heart knew. Jenna paced slowly between the rows of chairs, tablet in hand, checking the meal plan. Her blonde hair was tied back, her uniform was neatly tied, and her every movement looked professional. But there was one thing that didn't match her professionalism: her attitude. Mark Rivera was behind her, holding a tray of drinks and smiling warmly at an elderly passenger. As Jenna passed, he tried to make eye contact to ask if she needed any assistance, but Jenna didn't respond. She just nodded, as if Mark were a helper rather than a peer. Naomi saw it all. She didn't want to judge. Everyone had tired days, everyone had bad days, and the service industry could be stressful at times. She understood that. But there was something about Jenna. It didn't feel tired. It felt purposefully unpleasant. Jenna stopped at seat 3C, the seat opposite Naomi. She leaned down and asked the passenger sitting there, "Sir, you requested the salmon entree, right?" Her voice was polite, even soft. Naomi noticed. When Jenna spoke to this white customer, she was different. Her words were softer. Her demeanor was friendlier. Her mouth was shaped into a service-oriented smile. Naomi felt a small pang of pain, not jealousy, not anger, but because she knew exactly what was going on. It was exactly like what her mother had experienced in the supermarket when she was a child. When her mother stood at the counter, the white clerk spoke to the person in front of her in honeyed tones. But when it was her turn, their voices were flat, without smiles. They didn't even look her in the eye. Naomi felt her chest tighten slightly. Such a small moment, but it hurt so much. Once Jenna finished checking seat 3C, she finally turned to Naomi. Her gaze once again stopped on her simple clothes, on her neatly tied hair, on her old leather bag. Every detail seemed to be being sorted out in Jenna's mind. Could someone like her belong in business class? Was someone like her classy enough to sit here? Jenna didn't ask what she wanted, didn't ask if she was comfortable, didn't open with a smile. Instead, the first thing she said was, "Ma'am, I need to review your boarding pass. Policy requires verification of certain passengers." A few people in the nearby rows looked up slightly. Naomi blinked. Jenna's voice was low, but sharp, like a cold knife cutting through the calm air. Naomi tried to keep calm. "I showed it when boarding. Is something wrong?" Jenna pursed her lips. "Just checking. Please give me your ticket." The way Jenna said it didn't sound like a request. It sounded like an order, and like she was trying to assert power over someone she considered out of place. Naomi slowly opened her bag and took out her ticket. She didn't want to create any more tension, but as she handed it over, she looked Jenna straight in the eye. There was something very light but very deep in that look, as if she was trying to hold on to the last bit of peace in her heart. Jenna glanced, just for 2 seconds, and Naomi saw the discomfort in that look. Not because there was a problem with the ticket, but because Jenna didn't think Naomi was right for this seat. "Fine," Jenna said curtly, handing the ticket back. "No apology. No thanks." Naomi took the ticket, put it back in her pocket, and took a deep breath. She could hear her heart pounding, not with fear, but with disappointment. A familiar disappointment. One she had tried to imagine she would never experience on her own airline. Jenna turned away, and before she disappeared behind the curtain leading to the galley, Naomi heard her sigh a sigh, as if she were enduring something unpleasant. Naomi closed her eyes gently, but in her mind, old memories rushed back like small waves. When Naomi was in high school in Chicago, her teacher once handed out a test and said to the class, "I didn't expect you to do so well." The statement sounded like a compliment, but to Naomi, it was a stab in the gut. Why was it unexpected? Was it because Naomi was the daughter of a woman who worked 2 jobs? Was it because Naomi was the only person of color in her AP math class? Naomi grew up with words like that, looks like that, half-hearted smiles like that. And today, on a plane bearing her own logo, she saw that kind of gaze again. She opened her eyes. The folder on her desk was open to the page about Culture First, the program she was developing to create an environment of absolute respect in every cabin. She looked at the words, and again, her heart sank. Maybe this was why she had been feeling uneasy since the airport. Maybe her hunch was right. Maybe Jenna won't stop here. Naomi took a deep breath. She told herself, "Be calm. Observe. Don't judge too quickly. No one learns respect in a day." But even though she tried to stay calm, the atmosphere around her was no longer calm. Quite a few passengers noticed what had just happened. Some looked at Naomi, a mixture of sympathy and concern. Naomi just sat there, quietly, trying to regain her sense of peace that had just been disturbed. It was just one small action from Jenna, but sometimes it's those small actions that start the biggest storms. And, unfortunately, Naomi knew that very well, because she has lived through such storms all her life. And at the front of the cabin, behind the curtain, Jenna Hill just closed her tablet with an annoyed look on her face. "I don't know why I keep getting annoyed by everything today," she muttered. Little did she know that in a few hours, the biggest annoyance of her life would begin from that very attitude. A storm awaits, one with winds strong enough to change the course of both women's lives. The business class cabin was bathed in a soft blue light, a peaceful exterior that seemed to lull everyone to sleep in the middle of the night sky. But inside Naomi, the sky was filled with familiar gray clouds, clouds she had tried to avoid all her life, now suddenly returning right on the plane, bearing her own logo. Naomi reclined her chair, intending to open the article on her computer to read it more easily. But before she could read the second line, she heard the curtain gently move aside, and a voice, Jenna Hill's, "Ma'am, I need to verify one more piece of information." Naomi looked up. The unexpected words made her pause slightly. "What information?" Naomi kept her voice calm. Jenna stood up straight, her chin slightly raised, her posture more commanding than serving. "Skylift policy requires that passengers purchase the correct ticket to sit in this cabin. We usually only see this with, how should I put it, customers who are not used to flying business class." A few nearby passengers looked up, not because Jenna spoke so loudly, but because her tone was so suggestive. That sentence, although not direct, everyone understood what it was aiming at. Naomi gently put down her laptop. She looked at Jenna, her eyes not angry, just calm as a lake at night. "I wanted to ask, is there anything specific that makes you doubt my ticket?" Naomi said softly. Jenna pursed her lips, her hands gripping the tablet as if she were holding some fragile power. "No, it's just some passengers sometimes get in the wrong seats. I just follow procedure." Naomi knew full well that this was not procedure. Procedure did not require a flight attendant to repeat the same check on a passenger who had already been checked. Procedure did not require a grumpy attitude. And procedure absolutely did not allow for judging a passenger based on appearance or personal bias. But Naomi also knew that reacting angrily now would only make things worse. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice calm. "If you really need to review it, I can provide it right away." Jenna crossed her arms and replied in a vague, meaningful voice. "Fine. We just want to make sure there are no mix-ups, especially with passengers who seem out of this cabin's standards." A silence fell. The air felt tense in the luxurious cabin. The man in seat 3C raised his head, his eyes narrowing. Mark Rivera, who was coming up from the back of the cabin, stopped dead in his tracks when he heard that. Naomi felt her heart constrict, not because she was offended, but because this shouldn't be happening. Not here, not on her plane, not with the philosophy of respect she'd crafted every comma. She gently placed the tickets on the table and signaled to Jenna. "You check?" Jenna took it, scanning it quickly as if looking for a flaw to prove her point. But the ticket was perfectly valid. Business class, purchased with Skylift's highest priority account. Access to the Infinity Member Lounge, a group that only a few dozen people worldwide have. Stop by the truth. Jenna frowned slightly and returned the ticket, trying to keep her voice cold. "Fine. Everything seems okay." Naomi said nothing. Jenna turned away, but before leaving, she still let out a sentence like a second cut. "But if you need help with the seat or the menu, just call me. Some people who fly this class for the first time are often a little confused." Then she walked away. Without looking back, without waiting for a response, Mark Rivera immediately approached, his face full of concern. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry if my colleague bothered you. I'm not sure if there's some misunderstanding, but Skylift doesn't have a policy of doing such a recheck." Naomi looked at Mark, giving a small smile. The smile of someone trying to ease the discomfort in someone else's heart. Not her own. "I know. It's okay. Don't worry." Mark was silent for a few seconds, seemingly debating whether to speak or not. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. "Ma'am, I've been in this business for a long time, and I know who to look for when they're acting strange. I'll keep an eye out. If you need anything, just call me." Naomi nodded. Mark left, but his eyes were still full of worry. Naomi watched Mark's back, then leaned her head back on the chair. There was a vague emptiness in her heart, angry, sad, and disappointed to the point of choking. She wondered, why do things like this still happen today? Why do well-trained people still say things like this? Those thoughts reminded her of her mother. Her mother always said, "You can work twice as hard as everyone else, but sometimes people only see the color of your skin. You can't control what people think. You can only control how you stand." Her mother's words were like a small flickering light in her heart, helping Naomi retain the last bit of calm. But just when she thought things had calmed down, another situation suddenly happened, quick and sour as the sound of paper being ripped. A passenger in row 4B, a middle-aged white American woman with short curly hair, raised her hand and called out to Jenna, "Excuse me, can you help me unlock the seat?" Jenna immediately walked over, with a completely opposite attitude when talking to Naomi. She bent down, smiling friendly. "Of course. To activate the recline mode, just press this button gently." Naomi looked at that scene. It was like watching a movie from the past, like seeing her mother step back in the store, while the white man in front of her received a gentle smile. Not that Naomi meant to compare, but that moment, it was so clear. And then, the smallest but most painful thing happened. When she finished helping the customer, Jenna turned back toward the aisle. She passed Naomi without looking at her. As she was about to pass, Jenna muttered something under her breath, almost to herself. "Business class is not for everyone." The words were as light as a breath, but fell into Naomi's ears like a thunderclap in the night sky. She closed her eyes. Her hands tightened around the blanket on her lap. Her face was calm, but her body was trembling slightly, not because of the words, but because of the memories that came flooding back like a tidal wave. Back when Naomi was little, people would say the same thing to her mother when they entered a fancy restaurant. "This place isn't really for people like you." That memory was imprinted on Naomi, like a small scratch, but it lived forever. And today, listening to it again on the plane she built herself, that scratch opened up again. In the forward compartment, the curtains fluttered. Captain Richard Owens stepped out, exchanged a quick word with Mark, then returned to the cockpit. Mark looked at Naomi. His eyes seemed to ask if she was okay. Naomi tried to smile reassuringly, but inside, an undercurrent was churning. Because she knows. When a person lets prejudice control their speech, it doesn't stop with one sentence. The real storm is still waiting to break out. The business class cabin was quiet, but it was no longer the warm silence of the first few minutes of the flight. It was more like a calm lake before a storm, suspiciously calm. Naomi could feel it, like the instinct of someone who had suffered too many wounds from the past. You don't need to see dark clouds to know a storm is coming. Sometimes just a look, a word, a slight change in the atmosphere is enough. And now, the starting wind of that storm is Jenna Hill. Naomi was trying to concentrate on the report in front of her when she heard Jenna's heels approaching. The clacking sound was steady, but there was something heavier, faster, as if the person holding them was in a restless mood. As Jenna paused, Naomi caught a whiff of perfumed lavender and woody, but cool, a scent that made one feel not pleasant, but watched. She raised her head. Jenna stood tall, her hands clasped in front of her, iPad tucked between her elbows, but most important was her face tense, uncomfortable, and trying to look professional, but unable to hide her frustration and prejudice. Jenna didn't start with a greeting, not with the usual ma'am. She said right away, "Ma'am, I need to confirm one more thing about your seat." Naomi put down her pen. The words were so familiar it hurt. She kept her voice calm. "I think I confirmed it." "Yes," Jenna replied, her lips curling slightly. "But I just checked the system, and I can't find your name on the priority list." A few nearby passengers glanced in the direction of the two, not because of the noise, but because the atmosphere was clearly tense. Naomi took a deep breath. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not on the system she was the one approving. She spoke softly but clearly. "Maybe you checked wrong. I'm an Infinity member." Jenna crossed her arms, her eyes carrying what Naomi didn't want to see, doubt that stemmed not from data, but from prejudice. "Ma'am, I triple-checked. If it was an Infinity member, your information should show up right away. But," Jenna paused, smiling faintly, "maybe you misremembered the type of account you set up." The statement is light, but hits at something people of color face all the time, being seen as unqualified for premium services. Naomi looked at Jenna. Jenna's eyes were filled with the conviction that the modestly dressed woman of color could not possibly be a high-end client, much less the CEO of the entire company. And that's what made Naomi's chest ache a little. "Can you check it again?" Naomi asked, her voice still gentle. "I checked, ma'am," Jenna replied, "and I think it's time to clear things up. Maybe your ticket was upgraded by mistake." She stopped, tilted her head, lowered her voice, but still loud enough for people sitting nearby to hear, or someone misplaced it for her. The air compresses instantly. An American man in row 2A raised an eyebrow. A Japanese passenger in 3C turned slightly to look at Naomi with concern. Mark Rivera, standing at the back of the cabin. saw Jenna standing in front of Naomi's seat and took a step forward, then stopped, hesitating. As for Naomi, it felt like a tight string was stretched across her chest. It didn't hurt, but it made it hard to breathe. Not the seat, not the ticket, but the way Jenna said it reminded her of hundreds of similar situations in her life, times when others had assumed she didn't belong where they considered class. Naomi put her hands on her thighs, trying to stay calm. "What do you want me to do now?" she asked. Jenna replied immediately. "Without hesitation, I need you to stand up. I'll take you down to economy to wait. Once we've verified, if there are no problems, I'll take you back up." The whole cabin held its breath. A small statement, but it packs a punch. Naomi slowly repeated, "You want me to move to economy. Not a transfer, just temporary," Jenna said, her voice no longer able to hide her annoyance. "To ensure compliance with company regulations." Mark could not bear it any longer. He quickly stepped forward. "Jenna, wait." But Jenna held up her hand to signal him not to interfere. Naomi felt her heart beat slowly and heavily. She felt clearly how her whole life, all her efforts, all her achievements, all her positions had been dismissed by a stranger in a few seconds. An unverified passenger cannot stay in business class, Jenna continued, her voice hard and cold. "I expect your cooperation." Naomi looked straight at Jenna, not angry, not afraid, just a pain that was hard to describe. Then she slowly said, "Can you call the flight supervisor?" Jenna chuckled softly, this time without hiding the sarcasm. "The supervisor is me, ma'am." The statement rocked the cabin. Mark rolled his eyes. "Jenna, that's not right." "Today's supervisor is." But Jenna interrupted. "I am in charge of this area. My decision-making authority is sufficient." Naomi closed her eyes for a second. Just a second. But in that second, she saw her mother, Linda Carter, standing in front of the luxury store, her hands shaking, trying not to cry as the clerk said, "Ma'am, this store isn't for everyone." Now, decades later, Naomi is being told the same thing, just with different wording. Slowly, Naomi opened her eyes. Her gaze was so calm that it made Jenna pause. Naomi said softly, but her voice was firm. "If you believe this is the right decision, then do what you think is necessary." Jenna curled her lips. "Good. Then please stand up." A small murmur arose among the passengers. But no one intervened. No one wanted to get involved. There were only looks that looked at Naomi with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. Mark took another step forward, his voice urgent. "Jenna, stop. Don't do this. This is—" But Jenna interrupted again. "Mark, I'm on duty. If you continue to interfere, I'll report you to the captain." Mark clenched his fists, looking at Naomi with an apologetic gaze. Naomi shook her head slightly at Mark, meaning she was fine, but clearly she wasn't. Naomi stood up. Her hands on the arm of the chair were shaking slightly, not because of fear, but because the feeling of humiliation, the feeling she had fought to overcome all her life, was now coming back. Jenna stepped aside, making way for a passenger who doesn't belong here. But just as Naomi took a step out of her chair, a voice rang out, not big, but sharp and powerful. "What is going on here?" The curtain in front of the cabin opened. Captain Richard Owens Boak Ra. His face was serious. His eyes swept around, then stopped at Naomi and Jenna. Jenna was startled. Naomi let out a long breath, because she knew the storm had officially begun. And from this moment on, nothing will be the same again. Captain Richard Owens' footsteps echoed slowly and evenly, like drum beats in the quiet cabin. He was not in a hurry. He was not hasty. But each step he took forward carried the weight of 25 years of experience and the seriousness of a man who knew his responsibility. The passengers fell silent. Some sat up straighter. Others pulled their headphones down to listen. Jenna Hill's expression shifted from stoic to a brief moment of confusion. Very brief. But Naomi saw it. It was clear Jenna hadn't expected the captain to intervene in this little matter, and certainly hadn't expected him to show up just as she was asking a passenger to leave her business-class seat. Naomi remained standing, her hands resting lightly on the arms of her chair. Her features were calm, but the calm was as thin as glass. She maintained it with all her experience and inner strength. The captain stopped right next to them. His eyes were serious, his voice deep and clear. "Jenna, just what's going on here?" Jenna immediately clenched her fists on the tablet, regaining her initial confidence. Her tone changed to professional, but she couldn't hide her defensiveness. "Captain Owens, I'm working on a case of misplacement. I can't find a record of this passenger on the business class and Infinity member list. Airline regulations require the captain raised his hand." A small gesture, but enough to make Jenna shut up immediately. "Let me talk to the passenger directly," he said. Jenna flinched, but then moved aside. The captain turned to Naomi, his voice softer, but still maintaining his characteristic seriousness. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. May I ask, did the flight attendant ask you to leave your seat?" That simple question to Naomi was like someone touching a spreading bruise. She didn't want to say it, but she knew she had to keep it true. Naomi looked straight at Captain, her voice low. "Yes. She asked me to go down to economy while we wait for verification." The captain raised his eyebrows, just a little, but enough to show his surprise. "Ma'am, was any specific reason given?" Naomi was silent for a second. Just a second. But Jenna, standing behind her, immediately interjected, "Captain, I'm just following procedure. The passenger's ticket isn't on the priority list, and, in some cases, passengers unfamiliar with business class will." A loud gasp came from row 2A. A Japanese man in row 3C shook his head slightly. The atmosphere changed. Naomi looked at Jenna, then at the captain. She spoke slowly. "I showed my boarding pass twice. I also explained that I was an Infinity member, but apparently that wasn't enough." The captain looked at Naomi for a few seconds. He read the calm in her eyes, but also the sadness underneath. Not a new sadness, but a sadness that had appeared many times in her life. Then he turned to Jenna, his voice low as steel. "Jenna, I need you to tell me exactly why do you think this passenger is in the wrong seat?" Jenna pursed her lips slightly, her eyes darting to Naomi for a moment. The look was no longer concealed. Because the system didn't show the name. And because," she stammered. A moment Naomi saw clearly. Jenna had no other reason prepared other than the ones she couldn't say. The captain narrowed his eyes. "And because," Jenna swallowed, "because the passenger didn't look like she stopped." The air froze. "Finish your sentence, Jenna," said the captain immediately. Jenna stiffened. Then, in confusion and defense, she blurted out, "Because it's not like an Infinity member." Half the cabin gasped, a seemingly normal statement, but everyone understood the hidden meaning. The captain didn't need another word to understand what was happening. He lowered his voice, low but heavy as stone. "Jenna Hill, I need you to follow me to the galley. Now." Jenna's eyes widened. "Captain, I write." His voice was not loud, but it was the voice of someone accustomed to making decisions in life-or-death moments. No one argued with it. Jenna bit her lip, turned, and walked toward the front of the cabin. Her steps were quick, showing her panic. The captain turned back to look at Naomi. His face softened noticeably. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for putting you through this." Naomi shook her head, her voice soft. "I'm fine. I understand how stressful your job is. It's just—" She paused. A small gasp. "I didn't think I'd have to deal with this on a skylift plane." Captain heard that, and his eyes immediately changed color. He bowed his head low. "A rare respect among cockpit leaders, I assure you. This will be resolved immediately. You will not encounter a similar situation again on this flight." Naomi thanked with her eyes. The captain turned away, following the direction Jenna had just disappeared behind the curtain. But before he could leave, the passenger in seat 3C, who had been silently observing, suddenly spoke up. "Captain, I think you should know I've been recording video from the moment she asked this guest to leave her chair." The whole cabin gasped. Naomi turned to the man, her eyes filled with surprise, emotion, and gratitude. He smiled slightly. "I feel like this is not right, and I think you should have proof." Naomi looked at him for a few seconds, then nodded deeply. "Thank you." Captain Owens turned back and nodded to the passenger. "Thank you. That video will be very important." Then he stepped inside the galley. The curtains closed. The cabin was quiet. But this time it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a waiting one, like waiting for a verdict, waiting for the truth, waiting for justice to speak. Naomi sat down in her seat. She placed her hand on her chest, pressing lightly to steady her breathing. An elderly passenger in front of her turned her head slightly, smiling slightly as if to reassure her. She responded with a thin smile. In her heart, she said to herself, "Sometimes what hurts the most is not the words, but the feeling of having heard them too many times in our life." But this time, she was not alone. Someone saw, someone spoke, someone stood by her. And at the front of the cabin, behind the curtain, Jenna Hill is about to face a truth she can no longer avoid. The storm was coming, and it was heading straight for her. The galley at the front of the plane was normally a quiet area where the flight attendants prepared meals and drinks. But now, the atmosphere was as heavy as an interrogation room. The cold white light reflected off the shiny metal, making every movement, every breath, tense and uncomfortable. Jenna leaned against the metal counter, her hands holding her tablet like a flimsy shield. Her body was tense, her shoulders were shaking, but she tried to keep her face straight, tried to look right, tried to believe she was right. But her heart was beating fast, faster than the engine outside. Captain Owens entered, pulling the curtain back behind him. A soft swish sounded, cutting off any retreat for Jenna. He stood tall and straight, his face so serious that even without shouting, others could tell he was angry. "Jenna." His voice was low and slow. "I need you to explain clearly what just happened out there." Jenna took a deep breath, regaining her professional face. "Captain, I was just doing my job. The system didn't show the passenger's name. I had to follow procedure. And the passenger didn't look." She paused. The captain crossed his arms. A simple yet powerful gesture. "Not like business class?" he asked again. Jenna swallowed. "I didn't say that. But that's what you mean," said the captain, not letting her get away with it. "I heard you very clearly." Jenna gripped her tablet tightly. Her palms were sweating. For the first time in years, her uniform felt too tight, too hot. "Captain, you know, in this business, sometimes you have to assess the situation. There are passengers." The captain interrupted, his voice so low it froze the air. "Judgment based on what? Based on skin color. Jenna opened her eyes wide, startled. No, I'm not a racist. But the way she said "I'm not" sounded too much like people who are defending themselves after saying something they themselves know is wrong. The captain took a deep breath, clearly trying to keep from losing his composure. Jenna, you asked a passenger to leave her seat because of your subjectivity. System errors happen. People make mistakes. But you do not have the right to insult a passenger. But I didn't insult. You did, the captain interrupted, in front of many passengers. You said, business class isn't for everyone. You implied that the passenger didn't deserve his or her position. Jenna turned away. Her hands shook harder. She tried to breathe deeply, but her chest still tightened. Captain, her voice was weak. I just want to keep up the standards of this cabin. I don't want to make any mistakes. I feel she doesn't look like an Infinity member. Captain looked at Jenna with eyes that were both angry and deeply disappointed. Are you talking about the woman you just insulted? He paused, then said slowly, Jenna, do you know who she is? Jenna frowned, slightly annoyed. How would I know? Maybe it was just some passenger who got upgraded to the wrong place, Captain said directly, clearly each word. That's Dr. Naomi Carter. Jenna blinked. She frowned, trying to remember the name. Captain continued CEO of Skylift Airways. A thunderous boom struck the galley. Jenna froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face paled so quickly that the captain had to put his hand on her shoulder when she staggered. You're joking, Jenna gasped. This is a joke, right? No, Jenna. The captain shook his head. No kidding, no exaggeration, no lies. The truth hit Jenna like a punch to the chest. She took a step back, then another. Her back hit the cold metal of the cabinet. No way, she whispered. CEO, really? But she doesn't. She doesn't look like she misspoke again. The captain frowned so deeply that his forehead appeared wrinkled. Like what? Jenna. Like a CEO, like a successful person, like a customer worthy of respect. His voice was still low, but each word was as heavy as stone. Jenna covered her mouth with her hand. She knew she was wrong. So wrong. So wrong. So wrong. I didn't mean to, Jenna choked. I just thought. Captain said, You think a woman of color, dressed modestly, can't be the most VIP in the system? That's what you think. Right. Jenna burst into tears. For the first time in the entire ordeal. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't putting up the mask of professionalism. She collapsed into a fold-down galley chair. Her hands covered her face. Her shoulders shook. The captain stood still for a few seconds, letting her calm down. But his voice remained stern. Jenna, you need to understand the consequences, not just because she's the CEO, but because you insulted a passenger on the very flight you were supposed to serve. Jenna choked. Captain, I know, but I can't. I don't know what to. Captain took the tablet from her hand and said, You will no longer be serving in business class. I will assign Mark to replace you, and you will wait for the decision after the plane lands. Jenna looked at him, her eyes red. Lost my job, didn't I? The captain did not answer immediately. He sighed, his voice dropping. Your future depends on how you correct your mistakes between now and the end of the flight. Jenna bowed her head, tears falling onto the metal floor. I get it. The captain turned around and prepared to leave. But before leaving the galley, he paused and added, And before you do anything else, you have to apologize to that passenger. A real apology, not just a passing one. Do you understand? Jenna paused. More tears fell, but she nodded. Yes, I will. The captain nodded slightly. Then he lifted the curtain and stepped out of the cabin. Jenna sat alone. Her arms hung limply. Her eyes stared blankly into space. Suddenly, her own words from not long ago echoed in her head. Business class is not for everyone. Now, that very saying was sinking her. Not because of the title, not because of the CEO, but because her conscience, for the first time in years, was forcing her to face an ugly truth she didn't want to admit. She judged others based on appearances and prejudice, and she just offended the wrong person. Jenna covered her face with her hands and sobbed. The galley was small, and cold, but the cry was loud and clear, like the voice of a man witnessing his own downfall. Jenna Hill stood in the galley for a few more minutes, trying to control her breathing. But the more she tried to calm herself, the more her heart pounded, partly from fear of losing her job, partly from shame, and mostly from fear of facing herself. She did what she always denied she could do. She looked at a person and saw only prejudice, not worth. She took a few deep breaths, wiped her tears with a tissue, fixed her hair, and adjusted her uniform. But no matter how much she fixed herself up on the outside, she still felt like she was wearing a heavy cloak of guilt. Finally, she stepped out of the galley. Every step in the long cabin was like a sentence. The passengers looked at her with a variety of eyes, curious, accusing, cold. Jenna felt small, exposed before dozens of strangers. She had thought the Navy uniform was an honor. Now it seemed like evidence of a mistake. The business class cabin was so quiet that she could hear the engine outside. The soft lighting filled the space, but did nothing to ease the tension that was gripping her. Dr. Naomi Carter was still sitting in chair 3A, straight-backed, calm, eyes fixed on the window. She wasn't sleeping, nor was she reading. She was just silent, as if having a conversation with herself. Jenna's heart clenched again. She looked too still, too confident, even too kind in her serenity. Jenna took a step forward, but her feet stopped 3 steps away. A wave of confusion made her want to turn back immediately. But then she remembered Captain Owen's words. "You must apologize. Real apology." Jenna took a deep breath, stepped closer, and stopped in front of Naomi's chair. "Dr. Carter," her voice trembled slightly, "could you give me a minute?" Naomi turned back. Her eyes were calm, without anger or resentment. It was that calmness that made Jenna feel even smaller than before. Naomi nodded slightly. "I'm listening." Jenna stood up straight, her hands clasped together. For the first time in her life, she no longer felt like a flight attendant, no longer someone with the power to serve and control the emotions of her passengers. She was simply a human being responsible for her own mistakes. "First of all, I want to apologize," Jenna began, her voice cracking. "I apologize for what I said earlier. I was unprofessional and disrespectful." She tried to keep calm, but her throat tightened. Everyone around her seemed to stop and listen. Jenna felt as if everyone's eyes were focused on her mistake. "I judged you wrongly," Jenna continued. "I had no right to do that, and I regret it." Naomi didn't answer right away. She put down her Kindle, clasped her hands together, and looked at Jenna with a gentle but sharp observation. "Do you know why your words matter?" Jenna shook her head, pursing her lips. "Because your words, when they come from someone in uniform, don't just represent you as an individual. They represent the company, our culture, our image." Jenna bowed her head. "I understand, and I'm sorry." Naomi nodded slightly, not in forgiveness, just in acknowledgement. "Do you know what makes me sadder?" Naomi asked. Jenna looked up slightly, tears welling up in her eyes. What it's that you don't see me as a normal person. You look at me and conclude that I'm unsuitable, just because I'm different from what you're used to seeing. Jenna bit her lip, her voice breaking. You're right. I was wrong. I let my personal feelings get in the way of my work. I didn't mean to, but it still hurt people. Naomi was silent for a few seconds. Then she leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. Jenna, everyone makes mistakes. What makes the difference is what people do after they make mistakes. Jenna took a shaky breath. I want to make things right, but I don't know where to start. Start by facing it, Naomi replied. You've already taken the first step. Jenna's eyes glistened with tears. Naomi's words were gentle, but they struck a chord. It made her ashamed, grateful, and relieved that at least she wasn't trying to push her further down the cliff. Naomi looked at her for a long time, then said, Jenna, next time you see a passenger whose name isn't in the system, ask them with respect, no matter who they are, CEO, doctor, mechanic, unemployed, because dignity isn't based on their business class ticket or what they're wearing. Jenna nodded vigorously, tears falling. Yes, I'll remember. I promise. Naomi smiled slightly, a rare smile, but enough to make Jenna feel like she could breathe again. Good. You can get back to work, Naomi said, her voice softening. Jenna bowed deeply. Thank you for giving me the chance. She walked away, but as she turned around, Naomi called back Jenna. Jenna stopped and turned around. Naomi said, Thank you for having the courage to face yourself. Not everyone can do that. Jenna stood still for a few seconds. Her chest tightened, but this time not with fear, but with a different emotion, deeper, more human. Thank you, Dr. Carter, Jenna said. I won't forget. Then she left. When Jenna returned to the galley, Mark Rivera looked at her, his eyes softer than before. Are you okay? Mark asked. Jenna nodded, her eyes red, I think. I just learned a big lesson. Mark smiled, putting his hand on her shoulder. Just someone who truly wants to change, and you just proved it. Jenna breathed a sigh of relief for the first time during the flight. The air felt lighter, but she also knew it wasn't over yet. She had to face the report, the board, the consequences of her actions. But one thing is certain, she would go into it with a different mindset, with a real sense of the respect a human being deserves. And in that silent moment, amid the steady hum of the Boeing 787's engines as it flew over the Pacific Ocean, Jenna understood what she had been missing all along. People are not to be judged by their appearance. They are judged by how they treat others, especially when no one is looking. As for Naomi, when Jenna left, she leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes, not because she was tired, but because she felt a deep sadness, mixed with a hint of hope. In her heart echoed the words that had followed her throughout her life. Not everyone can change, but everyone can be given a chance. And tonight, at over 30,000 feet, she did just that. As the business class cabin slowly returned to normal after the emotional conversation, Dr. Naomi Carter sat quietly for a few minutes. She rubbed her hands together, not because she was cold, but because she was thinking. She knew Jenna was sorry. She felt it. But she also knew what had happened today was more than just a personal matter between two people. It was a symptom of a larger problem, one that she, as CEO, could not ignore. Naomi breathed slowly. Her eyes turned to the window, looking down at the sea of white clouds as soft as silk. The plane glided through each layer of clouds, leaving a thin white trail behind like footprints on snow. In that moment, she made a decision. She stood up, softly, unobtrusively. She walked to the forward galley where the company's satellite phone could be used. When Naomi poked her head in, Mark Rivera was a little startled. "Dr. Carter, what do you need?" "Can I?" Naomi smiled. "I just need some privacy to make a call. I'll use my account." Mark immediately gave up his seat, nodding politely. "Yes, of course. If you need any further assistance, just let me know." Naomi smiled in thanks, then picked up the black satellite phone and dialed a familiar number that was deeply imprinted in her memory. Ava Thompson's number, Senior Human Resources Director of Skylift Airways, the person directly responsible for discipline, corporate culture, and the most difficult personnel decisions. The phone rang twice. Then the other end picked up. Ava said in a sleepy, professional voice, "Dr. Carter, what's wrong? You're still on your way to Tokyo." Naomi's voice was calm, but sharp as a well-tightened string. "Yes, and this flight just had an incident. I need you to write down the details." Ava immediately became more alert. "I'm ready. Go ahead." Naomi recounted the whole incident from Jenna questioning the ticket, to the disrespect, to the comment that business class isn't for everyone. She told it slowly, concisely, without adding anything, leaving nothing out. Ava was silent throughout, only occasionally typing notes. When Naomi finished, Ava sighed. "I'm sorry that happened to you, but thank you for staying calm and handling it properly." About Jenna Hill. "What do you want me to do?" Naomi did not answer immediately. She looked down at her hands that had held NASA computers, signed billion-dollar contracts, and held young employees' hands when they needed motivation. She understood the power of discipline, but she also understood the power of second chances. A long time later, she said, "Ava, I want her to take responsibility, but I also want her to have a chance to make things right." Ava nodded on the other end of the line. "I understand. You want some form of discipline, but not firing. That's right. Do you have any suggestions?" Naomi thought for a few seconds. Then she said firmly but kindly, "I want her suspended, and she will have to re-enroll in a full diversity and anti-bias retraining program. No fluff, no fluff, no frills," Ava recorded, her voice firm. "Okay, I'll arrange it. What about after the course?" "After that," Naomi continued, "she has to do a personal report. Not for me, for her own team. Why did this happen today? And what did she learn? I want her to stand before her colleagues as a grown-up, not a reprimanded flight attendant." Ava typed on the keyboard again. "And what was her position on the flight?" "Put her on temporary backup crew. No business cabin duties for at least 3 months." Ava sighed. "I think she would appreciate hearing you chose this approach instead of outright dismissal." Naomi smiled slightly, a smile that contained both firmness and compassion. "Everyone falls down sometimes. What matters is whether they want to get up or not." On the other end of the line, Ava spoke softly, almost emotionally. "You have always made me proud to work with you." "Dr. Carter," Naomi replied affectionately. "Thank you. Ava, I'll send an official report when I land." Then she hung up. As she stepped out of the galley, Naomi felt calmer. But what made the cabin feel especially light was the feeling that everything was falling into place. Not with cold punishment, but with a justice that has a heart. She returned to seat 3A, sat down, and took out her Kindle. But she didn't read. She stared at the back of the seat in front of her, lost in thought. In that moment, she recalled an image from a very distant memory. A 24-year-old Naomi, the only black engineer in a white lab. A manager told her bluntly, "Who would think you're an aeronautical engineer?" That saying has followed her for more than 30 years. Today, it reappears, but in a different way. The young girl has become a CEO, but the prejudice is still there, creeping into voices, looks, and even small routines like this one on the flight. Naomi closed her eyes, then let out a long breath. The important thing, she told herself, is never to let yourself become like them. A few rows away, Mark Rivera was still silently watching Naomi from a distance, not with curiosity, but with admiration. He whispered to his colleague standing near him, "You know, I've been in this business for over 8 years. I've never seen anyone as calm and compassionate as her in such a stressful situation." The colleague nodded. "Yes, there are people who, just by standing close to you, you can tell they have a very gentle power." Mark chuckled. That word is true, a gentle force. But while everything seemed to be back to normal in business class, back in the galley, Jenna Hill stood leaning against the wall, her arms crossed over her chest. She just heard Mark whisper, "Dr. Carter just called down to HR." Jenna felt her legs go weak. What did she say about me?" Jenna asked, her voice almost trembling. Mark was silent for a second. He looked straight into her eyes. She doesn't want you to get fired." Jenna paused. Her breath was caught in her throat. "Really, after all I've done?" Mark nodded slightly. "Really, but she wants you to fix her. Seriously." Jenna wiped her tears away. "I will, I promise." Mark patted her shoulder. "You can do it." She nodded. For the first time since the incident, she felt like her future, however vague, still had a small glimmer of light ahead. Not bright, but enough to keep her going. Night still stretched out outside the window. The Boeing 787 still flew steadily at an altitude of more than 30,000 feet, piercing the silence of the Pacific night sky. And there, in the middle of a space that is both small and endless, 3 people in 3 different positions are facing themselves. A CEO who both endures prejudice and seeks to uplift others. A flight attendant, standing between losing everything or having to learn from scratch. A pilot, disciplined but still believes in human reformation. In that vast sky, the miracle that takes place is not that planes can fly over oceans. It is that people can still choose humanity even when they have reasons not to. The cabin gradually fell silent. The cabin light switched to sleep mode, a soft blue light covering the seats like a gentle mist. The engine noise was steady, so steady that it sounded like the breathing of a giant creature lulling all the passengers to sleep. But Jenna Hill couldn't sleep. She stood alone in the back galley, a place where few people passed by at this hour, her hands resting on the cold stainless steel table. Even though the plane was flying over the Pacific night, Jenna felt as if she were standing in her own sky, dark, heavy, and filled with shadows that were hard to look directly at. She closed her eyes. In the darkness inside her eyelids, Naomi's image returned like a ghost. Calm face, eyes clear but sharp, voice soft but heavy as stone, and that saying, "You don't see me as a normal person." Jenna opened her eyes and inhaled sharply. Her chest felt tight, as if someone were squeezing it from the inside. A moment later, Mark Rivera emerged from the crew rest area. He found Jenna standing still, her shoulders stiff, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if trying to hold on to something to keep from collapsing. Mark gently approached Jenna. "Are you okay?" Jenna didn't turn around. She swallowed hard. "I do not know." Mark stood beside her, but kept a respectful distance. His voice lowered. "Hey, you did the most important thing. You faced it. You apologized. Not everyone has the courage to do that." Jenna laughed softly, but it was a sad laugh, Mark. The scariest thing is not facing other people. It's facing yourself. I think I'm not that kind of person. I used to think I was kind." Mark tilted his head to look at her, listening silently. "Kindness isn't something everyone can do all the time," Mark said softly. "Everyone has a dark side, but not everyone dares to look into that dark side." Jenna turned to him. "Have you ever felt so bad about yourself that you didn't recognize yourself?" Mark sighed, then nodded. "Yes. I used to be very judgmental, the kind of person who thought I was better than everyone else. Then one time, an old passenger fainted from hypoglycemia. I thought he was drunk. I made a mistake, and it hurt so much that I had to change." Jenna looked at him, her eyes softening a bit. "You are not alone in this," Mark concluded, but Jenna shook her head. "No, Mark, my story, it wasn't just a misjudgment. It was part of something ugly inside, something I didn't want to acknowledge." She put her hand on her chest. Prejudice, arrogance, invisible pride. Mark didn't say anything more. He understood that what Jenna was going through was an internal battle, a lesson no one else could learn for her. The afterdeck was so quiet now that we could hear the soft click of the water heater keeping the coffee warm. Jenna looked at the paper cup in front of her. She picked it up, then put it down. "You know," Jenna said, "when I saw Dr. Carter walk up, I didn't think she was anyone important. She was dressed simply. Her hair was braided, no expensive jewelry. I looked at her, and my mind automatically thought, not business class worthy." Her voice broke. "Mark, that's terrible. How could I think that?" Mark placed his hands on the edge of the table near her, listening intently. "Jenna, sometimes people don't realize they have prejudices until they're forced to confront them. But what you're feeling right now, it shows you're not a bad person." Jenna looked at him, her eyes red. I'm afraid I don't deserve to continue doing this job." Mark smiled, but it was a very gentle smile. "If you were unworthy, you wouldn't be standing here blaming yourself. Unworthy people never see their mistakes. But you do." Jenna was silent. Mark continued. "Dr. Carter gives you a chance, and you have to honor that chance by changing, not just to keep your job, but to prove that a person can be better, if only they are willing." A tear fell onto the back of Jenna's hand. This time, it's not fear, it's gratitude. A long time later, when Mark returned to work, Jenna was still standing there, but her heart felt a little lighter. She took out her crew phone, opened the notes section, and she started typing. Not a report, not a perfunctory apology, but these are my true thoughts. I used to think kindness was something I was born with, but today I understand that kindness must be learned, practiced, and chosen every day. I want to be a better person, not for anyone else, but because I need it." She paused for a beat, then continued. "Dr. Carter has faced prejudice all her life, yet today she chooses to forgive. Her generosity makes me feel ashamed, but also hopeful." In that moment, the heaviness in her chest eased. Just a little, but enough to let her know that she still had a chance. There is still a way to go. At the front of the cabin, Naomi was still awake. She saw Mark pass by and asked softly, "Is she better?" Mark smiled, I think. "She's learning a big lesson, and she seems to want to learn it properly." Naomi nodded, satisfied, but not proud. "That's a good thing," she said, "because the greatest lessons in life never come easy." Mark smiled softly. "Dr. Carter, you are a very patient person." Naomi looked out the window, her voice low but warm. "It's not patience, Mark. It's just that having been in the shoes of the person being doubted, I know how painful it is, and I don't want anyone else to go through it without a way out." Mark nodded, deeply feeling that statement. A moment later, Naomi received a tray of hot tea from Mark. She thanked him and placed it on the small table next to the chair. As she took a sip, she closed her eyes, and a vague feeling came over her that tonight wasn't just Jenna learning a lesson. It was also her being reminded of why she started it all in the first place, to build a place where everyone felt respected, whether it's a CEO or a faceless passenger or a flight attendant who made a mistake. That place, Skylift Airways, is the dream of the young girl who once stood in front of NASA's gate and said to herself, "Someday, I will create something bigger than prejudice." And today, in the heart of the night, in the quiet sky, that dream is still being written. As the Boeing 787 began to approach the Japanese airspace, a faint light from the horizon crept in through the windows. The pale pink of dawn drifted across the clouds, bathing the business-class cabin in a soft, silken glow. A beautiful moment, the kind anyone who has ever been on a long-haul flight knows. The moment the plane touches down in the morning before the ground. Naomi Carter opened her eyes and looked up at the window. She hadn't slept, but the light eased her tiredness a little. Somehow, dawn always reminded her that things had a way. She let out a small breath, ready for the rest of the flight. Behind the cabin? Jenna Hill saw the light too, though only through the galley curtains. It shone on her face, making her sleep-red eyes seem a little brighter. She stepped out into the aisle and stood for a moment to feel the new feeling in her heart, a kind of peace mixed with anticipation. Not expecting forgiveness, for Naomi had already given it to her. Not expecting the job to end, for she knew it was still very precarious, but rather looking forward to a chance to do better. A chance to move forward without hiding behind your old self. Mark Rivera walked by and handed her a glass of water drink. You need to keep your strength up if you're going to be a cabin crew when you land. Jenna received the glass of water and smiled lightly. Thanks for last night, too. Mark nodded. We all have long nights. What matters is who we are tomorrow morning. Jenna was silent, but the words lingered in her mind, like a comma in a new chapter. As the cabin began to light up, Naomi prepared to close her Kindle, but a soft voice came from the speaker. Dr. Carter, this is Captain Owens. If you have time, I would like to see you for a moment in the open cockpit. Naomi was a little surprised. Pilots didn't usually invite passengers onto the flight deck, not even the CEO. But Owens's tone sounded formal, as if he thought it necessary. Naomi stood up. Jenna, who was patrolling the aisle, moved slightly to the side to let him pass. Their eyes met, briefly, not tensely, just a quiet acknowledgement that they understood each other better than before. Naomi smiled slightly. Are you feeling better? Jenna nodded. Thanks to you, and thanks to what you said. Naomi touched Jenna's arm lightly, a small but warm gesture. Good. Keep it. Jenna. Jenna bowed her head, as if receiving a blessing. Naomi walked to the cockpit door. Mark opened the passenger door for her, and Owens waited inside, stoic but not tense. Thank you for your time, Owens said. I want to show you something. He pointed to the display on the side panel, where a small note read Cabin Report, Incident Log Jenna Hill, pending resolution. Naomi looked for a few seconds, then turned. Do you want me to confirm something? Owens shook his head. No. I want you to know that I appreciate the way you handled things last night. Not many leaders can maintain that composure, especially when it comes to themselves. Naomi smiled. Her voice gentle, Captain. If I lose my temper, I'll be no different from those who made me feel wronged. We don't need more people like that. Owen sighed softly, as if relieved. I've met CEOs who don't even understand the pressure their employees are under. But you are different. I want you to know that my crew appreciates it." Naomi nodded, not boasting. I was just doing the right thing. "And Jenna, I don't want her future to end because of one mistake." Owens crossed his arms, looking at Naomi with genuine respect. "There's a saying in my profession that I've always believed in. A good pilot isn't someone who doesn't make mistakes. It's someone who corrects them before it's too late." I think she saw that in Jenna, too. Naomi nodded slightly. "Yes, and I believe she will prove it," Owens replied with a rare smile. "Thank you. For my team and for Jenna." When Naomi returned to business class, breakfast had already begun. Jenna was carrying trays to each seat. What caught Naomi's attention was a small change. Jenna bowed lower when saying good morning. Her eyes were more focused and sincere. There was no trace of the rigidity of someone who wanted to follow the procedure but lacked heart. Naomi sat down in the chair. Jenna stepped forward. "Do you want scrambled eggs or oatmeal?" Jenna asked, her voice no longer shaking like the night before. Naomi chose oatmeal. Jenna nodded slightly, placed the tray on Naomi's table, and left. But before leaving, she whispered, "Thank you for not abandoning me." Naomi looked up, her eyes warm like the dawn light just coming through the window. "I don't believe in abandoning people. I just believe in guiding people to where they can be better." Jenna had to bite her lip to keep from crying again. As the plane began to lose altitude, the captain's voice rang out, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to land in Tokyo. Please fasten your seat belts." A silence filled the cabin. But beneath that silence was something else, a sense of change. Quiet, unobtrusive, but very real. Naomi leaned back in her chair, hands on her thighs, feeling a sense of peace spread through her body. On the plane that was gradually approaching the ground, a CEO regains faith in humanity. A flight attendant understands the value of facing mistakes. A pilot maintains discipline but respects others. All three had been through a long night, but this dawn gave them all the same thing: hope. Hope that people can change. Hope that kindness still has a place. Hope that if just one person chooses humanity, the world will be a little lighter. Naomi leaned her head back on the chair, closed her eyes, and smiled. The most important thing is not how high an airplane flies, but how high a human being can reach. And the SL-207 continued to descend, heading towards the light of dawn. As the Boeing 787's wheels touched down on the Narita runway with a soft but sharp thump, Naomi Carter opened her eyes. A feeling of relief and heaviness washed over her. She had been on longer, more difficult flights, but this one felt different, like a pivotal moment in a story much longer than itself. Jenna Hill stood at the back of the cabin, hands on the arms of her seat, eyes forward as the announcement came through the loudspeaker, "Welcome to Tokyo. Thank you for flying with Skylift Airways." No one in the cabin knew that the person who had heard that greeting hundreds of times felt it as if it were the first time. Not only the passengers had landed, she herself had also just landed after a stormy night in her heart. When the plane came to a stop, passengers began to gather their things. Naomi stood slowly, pulling on a thin cardigan. She was in no hurry. There was no need to rush. When you have faced larger-than-life challenges, you learn not to always run. But Jenna felt the opposite. Everything felt slower than she could bear. Every second Naomi spent on this flight was a second she worried about where it was all going. As Naomi approached the exit, Owens waited there, as if to give her one last goodbye. "Thank you for coming with us." His voice was low, but had a different tone of respect than before. Naomi shook his hand. "Thank you, Captain Owens. Your calmness kept things from getting out of hand." Owens smiled. "That was my job. But the way she handled it is what I remember the most." Naomi just nodded slightly, as if the compliment neither flattered nor humbled her, but merely confirmed a truth she had known all along. Everyone had a role, and everyone carried their own responsibilities. Jenna stood a few steps away, her hands clasped together, her palms sweaty with nervousness. As Naomi approached, Jenna took a deep breath and bowed her head. "Have a good trip, Dr. Carter." Naomi saw the sincerity, the worry, the anticipation, the gratitude hidden in that bow. She stopped, then said softly but clearly, "Jenna, thank you for facing this like an adult." Jenna looked up, unable to hide her emotion. "I will never forget what happened," and Naomi raised her hand slightly, signaling to stop. "No need to say more. Prove it with your actions. That will last longer than any words." Jenna pursed her lips and nodded vigorously. "Yes, ma'am." Naomi looked at her for another second, as if to give her some invisible power, then stepped off the plane. In that moment, Jenna felt like she had been dropped onto a new ground. Not Tokyo, but the ground of a better version of herself. The bridge area leading to the terminal was quieter than Jenna expected. Naomi walked slowly, as if contemplating everything she had experienced. When she reached the end of the tunnel, a man in a black suit was waiting. "Dr. Carter, this is Kenji Sato, Skylift Asia representative. We have prepared a meeting room and a car to take you to the hotel." Naomi just nodded. "Thank you, Kenji." But just as they were leaving, Naomi felt her phone vibrate. She opened it, a text from Ava Thompson. "It has been processed as you requested. Jenna will be notified when she returns to Seattle. And Dr. Carter, thank you for your choice." Naomi smiled, not because of victory, but because of the feeling that things were going in the right direction. A human story needs consistency, not just in the clouds, but on the ground too. Meanwhile, Jenna was still on the plane, standing in the empty cabin that was being cleaned. Mark saw her still standing there and walked over. "Why don't you go rest a bit? We have a return flight this afternoon." Jenna shook her head. "I just want to stand here for a bit. Want to remember everything that happened. Want to make sure I never repeat it." Mark smiled softly. "I believe you don't need to be afraid of that. You've changed." Jenna looked at him gratefully. "Mark, do you think I can continue?" Mark crossed his arms, thought for a few seconds, then replied firmly, "Yes, but you have to accept that change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. You have to start. That's the hardest part." Jenna exhaled, a long, soft breath. "Yes, and I think last night was the biggest lesson of my life." Mark nodded. "We all have a lesson to remember for the rest of our lives. As for you, at least your lesson helped someone else feel respected." Jenna bowed her head, her voice low. "Yes, and I hope that one day I can proudly tell this story as how I overcame it, not as how I caused it." Mark patted her shoulder. "You can do it." At the same time, Naomi left the skywalk, dragging her small suitcase beside her. But when she reached the VIP lounge, she stopped in front of the large glass doors overlooking the runway. The sunlight was already pouring in, illuminating the white planes preparing for takeoff. The planes, bearing her airline's logo, a bluebird soaring into the sky, were like fragments of a childhood dream. Kenji stood beside her, waiting silently. Naomi said softly, as if talking to herself. "Kenji, do you know why I still like flying?" Kenji was a bit surprised, then replied, "No, but I really want to know." Naomi looked out at the runway, her eyes warm, because every flight is an opportunity, a chance for people to face each other in a space where there is no escape, a chance to make things right, a chance to be kind, and sometimes a chance to find ourselves again. Kenji smiled slightly. That's why Skylift is different. Ma'am. Naomi turned to him. Not Skylift. People. People who dare to learn from mistakes. She gently pulled the suitcase. Let's go. We have a long day ahead. In the empty cabin, Jenna took one last look around. No passengers, no Naomi, just the soft whir of the air purifier. But Jenna felt like Naomi was still there somewhere in her words, her actions, and even the way she looked at things this morning. She placed her hand on chair 3A, the chair Naomi had sat in. A light touch, a silent vow in the heart, I will do better. I will be better. I will not let last night be a reason to stop. I will let it be a reason to move forward. And with that vow, she stepped off the plane, not as someone who had just made a mistake, but as someone who was starting over. Outside the plane window, the Tokyo sunlight fell on her face, warm and gentle. She squinted, then walked on lighter, stronger, not because she had finished making amends, but because she had just learned that the path to making amends had truly begun. Tokyo in the morning always has a very different feeling, not like Seattle with its cold and dampness, nor like New York with its hustle and bustle. Tokyo is a kind of disciplined peace, a rhythm of life so orderly, refined, and quiet that sometimes people feel they have more time to think. Dr. Naomi Carter walked into the VIP lounge at Narita Airport. The space was simple but sophisticated beige velvet chairs, light wood tables, a light matcha scent in the air. She sat down, leaned back in her chair, and closed her eyes for just a few seconds to relax. Kenji Sato sat a table away, handling emails on his laptop. But his eyes occasionally glanced at Naomi, not out of curiosity, but out of respect and wanting to make sure she had everything she needed. No one said anything, but the silence was comfortable. Naomi's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Ava Thompson. Naomi opened the machine. Ava. What's wrong? Ava's voice was a little hesitant. Dr. Carter, I think you need to know this before the company sees it online. Naomi straightened her back, feeling a slight tension in the back of her neck. What Ava exhaled before saying, a passenger on SL-207 last night posted a video. Jenna yells at her. Naomi closed her eyes for a second. She knew it could happen in this age of cell phones. A person's actions could go viral in minutes, but she hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. She asked, is the video edited in a negative way? Ava replied no. The person who posted it only posted the truth. But the comments were not gentle. Naomi breathed slowly. Send me the link. Less than 2 seconds later, the notification appeared. Naomi opened it. It was a short clip, just 18 seconds long, of Jenna saying the line that sent shockwaves through the cabin business class is not for everyone. The video doesn't show Naomi's face clearly, but Jenna's voice and demeanor give viewers an idea of what's going on. Below the video are thousands of comments. What kind of rude flight attendant? That black woman seems very polite. Skylift should fire this person immediately. I can't believe this is still happening in 2025. Shame on the company, and especially the comment with the most likes. If I were that woman, I would sue the company directly. Naomi put the phone down on the table. Her pulse quickened a little, not from anger, but from the knowledge that the conversation had moved beyond cabin 3A. It has become a public affair, a media affair, a social affair, Ava asked worriedly. How do you want us to handle the media? Do we need the PR team to intervene? Naomi looked out the large glass windows, where the Tokyo sunlight was pouring down onto the runway. Then she said, slowly but surely, no, we don't hide the truth. We face it. Ava pondered for a few seconds and then replied, "I get it." Naomi continued, "I will make a personal statement, not naming anyone, not criticizing anyone, but making it clear that our firm does not tolerate discrimination and we are working to fix it." Ava agrees. That is the right way to handle it. Naomi nodded slightly. "Just go through the steps and I'll send you the documents in an hour." When Naomi hung up, Kenji looked at her, a little worried. "Is everything okay?" "Ma'am." Naomi leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes down at her teacup. "Whether it's okay or not is still something I have to deal with," she said calmly. "The important thing is that I know what to do." Kenji bowed his head. "Yes." Meanwhile, on the tarmac, Jenna Hill was stepping out of the plane's rear door to help the engineering team with a cabin checklist. She had no idea the video had gone viral, but when she returned to the cabin, Mark was standing there looking at his phone screen, his face slightly pale. As soon as Jenna got close, Mark immediately turned off the screen, but it was too late. Jenna asked, a feeling of unease rising. "What's up?" Mark swallowed. He knew Jenna was trying to recover from her mistakes. He also knew that the video could push her back into the abyss. He considered for a second. Then he spoke honestly. "Jenna, last night's video was posted online." Jenna's heart stopped. What video? Mark did not reply verbally. He showed her the phone. When Jenna saw herself saying that, with that voice and that look on her face, all the blood in her body seemed to drain away. "No," Jenna whispered. No, Mark, I can't." Mark put his hand on her shoulder. "I know. But it happened." Jenna felt dizzy and her palms were cold. She shook her head repeatedly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just, I was wrong. Mark, I was really wrong." Mark held her shoulder, his voice firm. "Jenna, listen to me. You're not a bad person. You were wrong. Yes, but you're making it right. And that's much more important." Jenna covered her face with her hands. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to go back to the night before and rewrite every word. She wanted to erase the moment she had let herself become the worst version of herself. But time does not turn back. She cried silently. Mark said softly, "Jenna, look at me." She looked up. Mark said, "The truth always has two sides, the painful side and the opportunity side, the opportunity to change, the opportunity to prove the people are wrong when they only see her through 18 seconds of video." Jenna gasped, "What if the company fires me?" Mark was silent for a moment, then said honestly, "I don't know. But I know, Dr. Carter doesn't want that, and she'll speak her mind." Jenna closed her eyes. For the first time, she prayed that someone she had hurt would still believe she could be better. Meanwhile, Naomi was rereading the draft of the press release she had just written. Every human being deserves respect. At Skylift Airways, we believe in understanding, kindness, and repair. We are committed to training better teams, having more honest conversations, and working tirelessly to build an equal environment for everyone. No heaviness, no blame, no excuses, just the truth and commitment. Kenji looked at her and said slowly, "Dr. Carter, do you think the media will understand?" Naomi smiled slightly. "Communication is not as important as knowing that we are doing the right thing." Kenji took a deep breath. He had never worked with a leader like this. Naomi stood up and adjusted her shirt. "Get the car ready. We have a meeting with our partner at 10 o'clock. Kenji nodded. "Yes, ma'am." But before leaving, Naomi stopped for a second, as if remembering something. "Kenji, if anyone asks about the video, just say the word." Kenji looked at her. which sentence Naomi replied, "We are working, and we are doing it right." At the back of the plane, Jenna looked at Mark with red eyes. "Do you think I still have a chance?" Mark smiled. "In Skylift, opportunities are not for the perfect. Opportunities are for the learner." Jenna wiped away her tears, and like Naomi, she told herself one thing: if the past cannot be changed, then the future must be changed. It was noon in Tokyo, and the sunlight poured down on streets so clean they reflected like mirrors. After a business meeting that had gone better than Naomi had expected, she returned to the hotel, not to rest, but to sit alone. In the quiet space, Naomi opened her laptop and read the news. The video recording last night's incident continued to spread, and like all stories told by social media, it always moved faster than the truth. Many articles exaggerate. Black woman humiliated on flight. The flight attendant was blatantly racist. Skylift Airways faces an image crisis. Naomi sighed softly. She didn't want Jenna to be the focus of public anger. She didn't want one mistake, however serious, to ruin a young girl's life. She closed the laptop. The image of Jenna bowing her head, remorseful, burned in her mind like a scar. Kindness is not being lenient. Kindness is knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Naomi stood up and walked to the hotel window, where a section of the airport runway could be seen in the distance. The metal birds took off, carrying hundreds of people, hundreds of stories. And she knew Jenna's story wasn't over. Just as her own story, her fight against prejudice, was never over. 2 days later, Jenna Hill walked into the Skylift HR office with slightly shaking hands. She knew a disciplinary decision was coming. Ava Thompson waited for her in the small conference room. Cold white light fell on the desk where a stack of documents and a glass of water lay. "Jenna, sit down," Ava said softly. Jenna sat down, biting her lip. "I will accept whatever decision the company makes. I just want to say in advance that I truly regret it." Ava raised her hand. "I know. No need to say more now." Ava opened the document on the table. Her voice was clear and coherent. After reviewing the crew's testimony, Captain Owen's report, the video footage, and especially the conversation with Dr. Carter, the company has decided as follows. The atmosphere was tense. Jenna clasped her hands together. Ava continued, "She will be suspended for 2 weeks to attend mandatory training on cultural diversity, non-discriminatory communication, and staff rehabilitation." Jenna nodded slightly. This was something she had mentally prepared herself for. After that, Ava continued, "You will be a cabin assistant for 3 months instead of a main flight attendant in business class." Jenna closed her eyes, a tear falling, but it was a tear of relief. Ava tilted her head. "Do you have anything to say?" Jenna opened her eyes. Her voice was shaky, but sincere. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm thankful for this opportunity, and I won't waste it." Ava smiled gently. "No one is born perfect, Jenna. It's who we choose to become after our mistakes. Dr. Carter believes in you, and I do too." Jenna cried. Not a cry of pain, but the cry of someone who had just seen a path open up before her, narrow, but enough to get through. Same afternoon, Naomi receives an email from Ava. The disciplinary decision has been passed. Jenna accepts it and is grateful for the opportunity. "I believe she will change." Naomi smiled softly. Sometimes we just need a little light to get through our darkness. 3 weeks later, Jenna Hill stood in front of the training room. Her heart was pounding. On the doors, a sign, "Diversity and Empathy Workshop, a Skylift Core Program." When she entered the room, she saw about 15 other people, Most were new flight attendants. Some had been with the company for years. A few looked at Jenna and recognized her within seconds as the one in the video. Jenna bowed her head, but instead of turning away, a young brown-skinned woman smiled at her. A middle-aged man nodded in greeting. Jenna felt something deep. No one here saw her as a remnant. They saw her as a human trying to learn again. The training session lasted for several hours. They discussed invisible biases, misreadings, and unconsciously hurtful moments. Jenna sat there, taking notes. Each example was a mirror of herself that night. At the end of the session, the instructor, a black woman in her 50s, asked, "Anyone want to share what they learned?" Jenna looked around. No one spoke. Then she took a deep breath. "I want." The whole room looked at her. Jenna stood up, her hands shaking slightly, but her voice much firmer than when she entered. "I thought prejudice was something that belonged to other people, to cruel people, to heartless people. I didn't think it belonged to me." She swallowed. "But I was wrong. And my worst mistake wasn't that I was mistaken. It was that I didn't realize the pain my words caused." The classroom was silent. Jenna continued, "I want to change myself, not for work, but because I want to become the person I thought I was." The lecturer nodded, his eyes deep. "Thank you for your honesty." The room applauded, softly but sincerely. Jenna sat back down in her chair, tears rolling down her cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of fear. Those are tears of relief, healing. 1 month later, Jenna's back at work, still a cabin assistant, still working hard. And then one morning, as she was checking the basket of warm towels, Mark walked up. "Hey, we have VIP guests today." Jenna chuckled. "Don't scare me anymore." Mark winked. "I'm not threatening. There she is." Jenna turned her head. A woman in a cream coat, her hair slightly curled, her gait leisurely. Naomi Carter. Jenny stood still. Naomi approached, smiling the same smile Jenna had seen in business class, soft, gentle, and powerful. "Hi, Jenna," Naomi said. Jenna bowed deeply. "Hello, Dr. Carter." Naomi looked at her for a long moment, not to judge, but to acknowledge. "You look much better," Naomi said. "I'm glad about that. Jenna was moved, it's all. Thanks to the opportunity you gave me." Naomi shook her head. "It's not thanks to me. It's thanks to you standing up." A very beautiful silence. Then Naomi continued, "I'm flying to Chicago today. But before I get on the plane, I want to see this with my own eyes." What Jenna asked, Naomi smiled. That people can be better if they really want to. Jenna bowed her head, her eyes red. Naomi placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Keep going like that." Then she turned away, leaving Jenna standing there, light as if a burden had been lifted, warm as if a lamp were burning in her heart. As Naomi entered the flume, Mark looked at Jenna. "Are you okay?" Jenna nodded, smiling for the first time in weeks without forcing it. "I'm fine now," Mark smiled. "That's best." Jenna watched Naomi's figure fade away, and she understood. The dark nights of life can be long, but a timely ray of light can take one far. She was wrong. She hurt people, but she also changed through honesty, through hard work, through courage. Like flights, humans can find their way back. They just have to be willing to take off again. The story Flight Attendant Insults Black Woman. Not knowing she was the CEO of the airline is more than just a conflict on an airplane. It reflects something many of us have experienced in our lives, a snap judgment, a thoughtless word, a look that judges someone because of their skin color, status, or appearance. And then the ripple effects that follow. For older audiences, this story reminds us of what we always teach our children. Respect for others never goes out of style. A right action today can open the way for tomorrow. On the other hand, a moment of anger, a wrong word, is enough to ruin a whole life. But the story is also about hope, about the ability to mend, to pick ourselves up, to learn from our mistakes. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It is about giving others a chance to become better versions of themselves. And that is what every society needs: doors that are not so tightly shut, hearts that are not so hard. May you carry this lesson with you into your life. Don't be quick to judge. Don't regret an opportunity to be kind. And don't miss a moment that might make someone believe there is still good in the world. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If it touches your emotions, if it reminds you of a kind act from the past, please help spread the message by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support is what keeps us going and allows us to continue to bring you healing and meaningful stories.